But I'm absolutely delighted to be here on what is a very, very special occasion. May I say at the very beginning that since I became president, I've had the opportunity of having a certain amount of connection with the appropriate paying of tribute to James Joyce and, of course, that great Galway woman, Nora Barnacle. Stephen Joyce, before he died, asked me, well, it was quite a while before he died, in relation to the, I'm sure you have heard what I have said already, but Stephen Joyce asked, we were discussing the position of Lucia, and he was very, very anxious that the memorial in Zurich would carry a tribute to Lucia, because that while there was space for Stephen in the grave, his wife Solange had died, and he wanted his ashes to be spread where her ashes were. So we arranged, and only just a few months ago, officially in Zurich, we opened a new tribute, which is, of course, which gave effect to what he had asked me to arrange. And it was, of course, the lovely poem from my daughter, the one Pale, the Rose, and so on. So we've done that. And Sabine and I, every year celebrates Bloomsday in Uachtarán, and it's always a very, very great occasion. And I think a great deal of the credit for today goes to my advisor, Claire Power, who lives nearby here. But she is among those who are very anxious that we would do something to commemorate something incredibly important. And that is that the influence that Michael Sonny Bodkin had on the work of James Joyce, both in terms of recollected memory, but also indirectly the influence on Joyce's writing, and not in a single place in Joyce's work. So it's 82 years since the death of James Joyce, and that we'll be now unveiling a plaque here in Rahoon Cemetery to commemorate as well. It's the 110th anniversary of the publication of James Joyce's Dubliners, which includes perhaps Joyce's most famous and celebrated short story, The Dead. I do remember in the discussions with Stephen Joyce too, his importance that he attached to this work, saying, for example, that sometimes in the United States influence and scholarship, that the Ulysses and the work in it and the critical work about it had in fact deflected from some of what he saw some of the very most important earlier work of James Joyce. But to say how has all this come about, Mr. Mayor, thank you for your introduction, but I do want to thank Galway County Council, who's represented by its Chief Executive, and I do want to thank for all of your help in bringing and able to bring this to fruition. And indeed as well, I have to say, if I was asked to choose among all of the books on the connections between Joyce and Galway, I wouldn't hesitate for a second in saying that Ray Burke's Joyce Country, it probably would be my choice. It is such a very, very, very fine book. As someone who is overwhelmed by books, I must say, it's a beautifully produced book. It's a great credit to those. I always refer to people not as publishers, but as makers of books, because it's a beautifully crafted book. And I want to thank Ray Burke for the assistance that he offered us in relation to tracing the relatives of Michael, who is represented today by their grannies. I think Rahoon Cemetery and Joyce's connection with it trace back to the 10th of June 1904, when he first met Nora Barnacle, who was born in the Galway Workhouse maternity ward, and who until moving to Dublin in 1904 at the age of 20 had lived in various locations around Galway City. I think in Ray's book, and I'm so delighted that he's been able to be with us today, Joyce visited Galway twice, briefly in 1909 and for a longer period in 1912. Now, I think there are many things in Joyce's work, both in terms of the way the phrase itself, Rahoon, the rhythm of it, it was very attractive to him. But Galway provided Joyce, as we all know now, with his life companion Nora Barnacle. And I think that more recently, some of the better work has been speaking about Nora's influence on his literary creativity. When I came at the age of 19 to Galway myself a long time ago, I think people were interested in did she save her soul and so forth because of her connection with James Joyce. But Nora was very interesting to Joyce because for a number of reasons. And what is, I suppose, most important, there is now general agreement that the story, The Dead, that was at the end of Dubliners, is in fact one of the great stories of the world. It is reflected by the New York Times, described as maybe the finest story in the English language. And when you read it again and again, as most people do, it's full of complexities. But what is in it in relation to Gabriel Conroy and his relationship with his wife Gretta and so forth, there is so much, in a way, that will tell you about how Joyce's drawing on the experience of Norah and her great loss and grief. To have someone, as she said in the story when he said, "Why did he die?" "I think he died for me," she says. It is such a powerful story. I think that Norah, now the work, recognises very much. It was just her sense of story, her sense of recall, and her sense of embedded memory, and that was not simply idiosyncratic, but also as coming out in published work now in relation to her writing, is that it is clear that she influenced Joyce's main character, Gretta Conroy in The Dead, but also Molly Bloom in Ulysses. It was Nora's, and I think here we are now in Rahoon, and we're acknowledging something incredibly important, I think, and that is that the fictional character of Michael Furey, who is drawn on for like Nora's experiences with young Michael Feeney, but particularly Michael Sonny Bodkin, who died respectively from 17 and at the ages of 17 and 20. When she said he died at 17. And there's something interesting as well in why the story of The Dead is such an incredibly important story. Is that it's important historically. It's a story that's set, if you like, in a set of in a declining class who are keeping the show on the road by recalling and keeping going the fuss and the simplicities. Well, as we said at what we have to, every year they had this gathering, so things have to be kept going. But also, if you like, it is at this period when the story was written about how, if you like, you can fill the vacuum of love with notions of respectability, which can be invested with a kind of ritualistic importance which they may not have. I think in 1912, Joyce visited Michael Bodkin's tomb here in Rahoon Cemetery, and I just so want to say how this is a very important event for the relatives of Michael Bodkin. I'm really pleased that Mary O'Connor, Michael's grannies, is present today. Where's Mary? You. I see you there, Mary. Now, I think that here in this as well, I think, as he described it, as Joyce described it, the imagined lonely churchyard where Michael Furey lay buried, that Michael Sonny Bodkin is the person on whom the fictional Michael Furey in The Dead was based, was laid to rest. And in his play Exiles, James Joyce makes further reference to Bodkin in the quote, "She weeps over Rahoon, over him whom her love has killed, the dark boy whom as the earth she embraces in death and disintegration. I remember when we opened the house in Nuns Island, when it was open for speaking, and we received a message from Lucia's carer at the time. I asked an older woman who met Norah at one of these visits. I said, what was she like? And she said, she wore very large hats and she looked mostly downwards. But in his poignant poem from 1913, James Joyce again writes, his poem She Weeps Over Rahoon. Joyce imagined standing with Norah mourning at the grave of Michael Bodkin. Rain on Rahoon falls softly, softly falling. Where my dark lover lies, sad is his voice that calls me, sadly calling at grey moonrise. Now, I think it is fair to say that the connection of Michael Bodkin and Norah and Joyce was recognised, and Father O'Dowd, whom we lost only so recently, is one of those who wrote about the dead. And he wrote and he said, although set in a snowy landscape of 1904, when the members of an extended Dublin family and friends gather for the annual Epiphany night dance and party, at the home of the Mrs. Markham, the dead reaches a dramatic climax as the chill of past experiences in the west of Ireland permeate the very being of Gretta Conroy. I think there's the great power of that, of the story that is the dead, is that it is endlessly challenging. There's no easy way out of the conflict of emotions that is represented in the principal characters. You can't say or conclude, for example, that things with the Conroys will necessarily be better. But what you can say is that memory can't ever be totally suppressed in such a way as to kind of gloss over current or present circumstances. The Dead is set on the 6th of January 1904, only 5 months before the date of Ulysses, and significantly the party described in the stories that I've said is a celebration of the 12th night, or the Epiphany, a term that is very important to Joyce himself. As I have said, it has had an extraordinary effect, that story, on so many people. Edna O'Brien I spoke to about it, and she's now happily out of hospital and again, but Ed was saying is among those who have said that she just finds herself going back to it again and again. It was very referred to by Leonard Cohen, of course, who used the image of the rain to transpose to Montreal, and of course it's and by T.S. Eliot and John Huston, of course, who directed the film adaptation. But what is perhaps notable in how each person who reads it, again I say, finds their own reason for admiration. Yes, in a way the style in itself is quite poetic in a way, so that you could avoid some of the depth of the challenges in it, but people have it is richly drawn, and the language, of course, is lyrical. In its poetic romantic acceptance of all that life and death offer, the Dead is a linchpin in Joyce's work. It is a work of tenderness and passion, of disappointed love and frustrated personal and career expectations. But there is a sense too, and thankfully we haven't had the rain today. We could have done nicely without it, but I think it is in a sense that if the rain is unavoidable falling over Rahoon, it is in fact also that the imagination of life is infinite, but the life itself is finite, and it is dealing with that contradiction as the source of most of the great impulses to culture anyway. So the story is more than a critique of the personal. It offers a critique of the society where the Miss Markins and so forth, they will be replaced by others who will agree in equally challenging fictions to try and avoid the reality of what is inevitable death. But I think it is a vision of the enlivening effect that may be found when the living contemplates the lives of those who have died. We are free to make a new fiction, as Joyce O'Connor has said, and also I think Joe O'Connor described it as where people walk the rainfall of duct responsibilities. I think Joyce's influences on that are many. I think, when I think back now to it all, this is a connection we're celebrating today that's a very important one, that makes a great important connection with, if you like, the love source of Joyce's work. The day takes an extra richness, an extra dimension. And I think I like very much the idea that we're left to draw new conclusions. Is it that, for example, Gabriel, who in the end sees the uselessness of his ironic questioning of Gretta, where he says to her, is he simply surrendering to a kind of paralysis which is surrounding everything? Or is he saying, yes, despite everything, it is important to retain the composure to say, one will continue trying to make alive. And the phrases used, which are beautiful in a way as well, it is the idea of a killing frost, because we get not only the rain, we're getting the killer frost. The newspapers were right. So I think if I might finish by simply saying this, but first of all to thank, as President of Ireland, to say how delighted I am that we're paying tribute to James Joyce and Norah and to Michael Bodkin and to all of these, as I said, the love sources of the stories which made how fortunate we are that James Joyce, one of the greatest writers in the English language in the world. If I might just finish with this, the quotation, as is appropriate then. Yes, the newspapers were right. Snow was general all over Ireland. It was falling upon the Bog of Allen and further westwards, falling into the waves. It was falling too upon every part of the churchyard where Michael Furey lay buried. It lay drifted on the crosses and headstones, on the spears of the gate, on the thorns. His soul swooned as he heard the snow falling through the universe and falling, like the descent of their end, upon all the living and the dead. Míle buíochas. Thank you.